Hello, proud members of the Calumet Memorial Park District community. This is your Executive Director, Target Johnson, or other known as Coach J, coming to you again with another lesson in how to play chess. In Lesson 1, we reviewed the pieces, their names, and their movements. For a quick review, we talked about the pawn, the rook, the bishop, the knight, the queen, and the king. We talked about their hierarchy. We talked about their importance and various movements that makes each piece valuable and special in their own right. I placed them here and according to their rank. One more time: the pawn, the rook, the bishop, the knight, the queen, and the ever so important king. All right? In Lesson 2, we also talked about Bobby Fischer Teaches Chess, an excellent buy. Actually, the lessons that I will be bringing to you will give you the basic fundamentals of the game of chess. If you want to advance and become an eventual expert in the game of chess, the only way to get there is through practice, and this book will be a nice boost and jumpstart into how you get to that level. Also, another thing, in terms of purchasing chess equipment, go to thechessstore.com. You can purchase pieces, boards, clocks, anything you need. So, thechessstore.com, you're welcome for this plug. Let me continue with today's lesson. In Lesson 2, we will go over the actual board, some of the different definitions or the things that define the actual chess board that the game is played on, how to set up your chess pieces, and I'll introduce to you a chess mini game called Pawn War. In addition to that, we'll go over some of the special terminology and special moves involved in chess, such as castling, en passant, check, checkmate, and stalemate. All right, so without further ado, let's move on to Lesson 2. So, as I said before, Lesson 2, we will talk about mostly the board and how to set up your pieces. As you see, we have the white pieces and the black pieces already set up on the board. But before we actually get to the actual pieces, let's start with the actual board. So, the board is a checkerboard, similar to the board that's utilized in an also familiar game of checkers. The difference here is you have your light pieces, you have your dark pieces, you have 64 squares on a chessboard. There are almost an infinite amount of moves that you can make in the game of chess. That adds to the strategy of the game. That makes the game a little bit more challenging, but also that much more exciting for those of us that love a challenge. In terms of the setting up of the pieces, the white pieces typically go on, which I will explain momentarily, ranks 1 and 2. The black pieces are set up normally on ranks 7 and 8. All right? Now, a question that you may be asking is, what are ranks? Good question. So, each particular square on a chessboard has its own name. Its name is determined by a file and rank system. Okay? So, if you focus on the board a little bit, if you see the board, you see that you have letters and numbers along the side. The letters that you see are the different files. This is your A file. You see an A here on this side and an A on this side. You have your A file, B file, C file, D file, all the way down to your H file. For your ranks, they are listed on the side of the board. You have your 1 rank, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way down to your 8th rank. Each particular square, as I mentioned previously, has its own name. The name is determined by its file and its rank. For instance, this square right here in the middle, this would be your E4 square. It is your E file for rank, E4. We give you a quick little quiz, see how much you have retained in just that small time. Can you say what this particular square would be? Give you a little moment to think about it. Okay, now, if you said B4, you were correct. It is in the B file, and it is at the 4th rank, which makes this particular square B4. If you look at different games in the past that have been recorded from different chess masters or different tournaments that have been recorded throughout the years, you would see different things like rook moves or F1 moves to G3. That just simply explains what piece, which in this case would be, well, knight. Knight moves from F1, which is its starting position, to G3, which would be its landing position. So if you're ever looking at different games and you wonder where all these numbers and letters come from, that's simply explaining the different move that was taken by that particular piece. Okay, so now that we've gone over the actual board, the rank and file system, the actual number of squares on the board, now we can move on to how you actually set the pieces up. When you are setting the pieces up, as I mentioned before, ranks 1 and 2 are designated for the white pieces. Ranks 7 and 8 are designated for the black pieces. That would assist you in how you turn the board, the proper way to turn the board when starting a game of chess. Typically, you start in your back row or your back rank. Start on the corners with your rooks. Your rooks go in A1 and H1 respectfully. Next, you have your knights. Your knights go in B1 and G1 respectfully. After your knights, or next to your knights, you have your bishops, also known as the king's messengers. Not sure where they got that nickname, but they got it. They go in C1 and F1 respectfully. Next to them, you have your king and your queen. Important things to consider or note: your queen always goes on its color. Remember, I mentioned before, you have your light or white squares and you have your black or dark squares. Your queen always goes on its color. White queen, white square. Your king always goes on its opposite color. White king, black square. Okay, so next we have the position of our pawns. You have 8 pawns, 8 black, 8 white. They go in the front rank. So your white pawns are always on your second rank. Your black pawns are always on your 7th rank to set up the board, of course. So that is the setup of your pieces. That is the setup of your pieces. Next, we will talk about some chess terminology and some special moves. The first move that I would like to explain to you guys is the castle move. Castling is a very popular and fundamental part of the game of chess. Castling is normally done in the opening phase of your game. The purpose of castling is to protect your king from immediate danger. Most chess experts or teachers will instruct their students to try to control the middle of the board. I will go through this in subsequent lessons when we get into the strategy of the game. But like I said, most people will tell you to control the middle of the board. That's where most of the action will be taking place. It is also where your king and your queen starts. So, an effective strategy in the game of chess is to castle very, very early. It's one of the first things that you want to do. Some of the rules in castling are as follows. Castling takes place between your king and either one of your rooks. In order to castle, there must be a clear path. If you remember from lesson 1, the only piece on the chessboard that is allowed to jump over other pieces is your knight. So, in order to properly perform the castling move, there has to be a clear path between the king and whichever one of the rooks that you would like to perform that move with. So, I will clear a path for my king to castle. Right here, the path is cleared. I can perform the castle move. In order to castle, you have to first move the king. You move the king 2 squares towards the rook that you are looking to perform the castle with. In this case, it is to my h1 rook. So I take my king, I move it over 2 squares towards the rook. I take the rook, I swing it over 1 square to the opposite side of the king. That is how you castle. Now, if you wanted to castle to the other side, let me clear a path. If you wanted to castle to the other side, the same move applies. You take the king, you move it 2 squares towards the rook, 1, 2. You take your rook, you swing it over to the opposite side of the king. Your castle is now complete. One more thing that I would like to add, if you pay attention to the positioning of the white pieces right now, this is an ideal start of the game. Again, I'll get to this more when I talk about the strategy of the game, but if you notice how the white pieces are positioned, most of their pieces are what you call developed. That means they are put into action. They're activated. They're put on the battlefield. This board is typically known as the war zone. Chess exemplifies this the strategy often utilized in war. There are a lot of parallels between the game of chess and life, and namely war. That's its origin. Anyway, so thus far, we've talked about the board, the many facets of the board, the file and rank system. We talked about castling. Now we're going to talk about a lesser known move in the game of chess. Actually, if I'm being honest, I learned the game of chess when I was a young boy. I was taught by my older cousins and my dad. And for years, I played the game of chess and I had never heard of this move. This move is called en. What happens in en passant is, I'll back up a little bit. One of the strategies that they will tell you in the game of chess, that I will tell you in the game of chess, is although your pawn is the least powerful piece, all the pieces on the chessboard can become very, very valuable and can actually win or lose you the game if you do not value its presence. The pawn is more valuable as you advance it into your opponent's territory. In fact, similarly to the game of checkers, if this pawn advances to your opponent's back rank, it can be promoted to any other piece on the board besides your king. There can only be one black king and one white king, because the object of the game is to capture your opponent's king. So, to remain honest and keep integrity, the game does not allow you to duplicate the king. But any other piece on the board can be duplicated once you advance your pawn to your opponent's back row. With that being said, many people like to advance their pawn. In this example, I will advance the pawn to the 4th rank. In this position, my opponent's pawn has done a number of things. First, he's taken away the ability of my D2 pawn to use its double square advance on its first move. It can't make that advance because it is occupying where it would land in the D4 rank. What many people do not know is that not only has it stopped my D2 pawn from advancing 2 squares, it has also eliminated the ability for my C2 and E2 pawns to use that same tactic. Now, a question you may ask is, how has it stopped those 2 pawns from advancing 2 squares when it's only occupying 1 square? Good question. What would happen if I advance my E2 pawn to E3? Or if I advance my C2 pawn to C3? What would happen in this position? If you answered that the black pawn could capture either of the 2, you were absolutely correct. So, by this pawn occupying this space, it can activate a move that I was just explaining called en passant. En passant means if you advance your pawn 2 squares, which would in fact advance it past the square in which it would be captured on the first move, your opponent then has the legal opportunity to perform what's called en passant. You simply move to the square that you would have occupied had they advanced just 1 square, and you capture your opponent's piece. This piece is called en passant. Okay? So again, quick review. En passant simply means it's a simple situation where if you advance your pawn in your opponent's territory, it eliminates the opportunity for your opponent to advance their pawn their 2 squares on their first move. It is very little known move in the game of chess. Not many people know it. If you perform the move, many people will challenge it. Tell them YouTube it. It's there. En passant. Okay. So, we've covered counseling. En passant. Now, we will explain what check, checkmate, and stalemate is. Those moves are a little bit more difficult to show you on the fly here. Those moves are explained in detail and diagram in Bobby Fischer Teaches Chess. Again, I cannot stress enough, this is an important buy if you want to not only learn the game of chess, but quickly evolve as a chess player and maybe become someday a chess master with lots of practice. But anyway, let's explain what check, checkmate, and stalemate is. Check simply means that your king is in danger of being captured. In this particular situation, this king is being threatened. The black king is being threatened by the white bishop. This move is called check. In order to, actually, as I look at the board, this move is really checkmate. Checkmate means not only is your king in check, but he can't move. He can't escape it. He can't flee. He can't run. He can't attack. And none of his teammates can intercept the move. An interception is by simply blocking the path or eliminating the threat altogether. So this move is actually checkmate. Check gives the king an escape. He can escape the threat. Okay? Checkmate, he's in check and there is absolutely no escape. The next move is called stalemate. When you're in a stalemate, it's a chess version of a tie or a draw. That means that you or your opponent do not have enough pieces to capture your opponent's king or to get them in what I just described as checkmate. That is stalemate. Okay? So, quick review of lesson 2. Lesson 2, we talked about the board, its many facets, some details and history of the board, how to set up your pieces. We talked about en passant, castling, check, checkmate, stalemate. That concludes lesson 2. Thank you. Hello, Calumet Memorial Park District. So, as promised with lesson 2, we will introduce the mini game of Pawn Wars. Pawn Wars is just simply a game that kind of gets you used to the strategies involved in the game of chess. It teaches you how to utilize your pawns more effectively, and it's a great introductory mini game. Like I said, as a kind of a prep or drill to help you to learn the game more efficiently. So, the game is very, very simple. The game is only used with your pawns, with your white pawns and your black pawns. The object of the game, also very simple. Remember earlier in lesson 2, I explained that Once your pawn advances to your opponent's back rank, it is promoted to any other piece on the board. That is the only object of this minigame, is to advance your pawns to your opponent's back row. It sounds simple, but it involves a little bit of strategy as you try to maneuver your pawns past your opponent to get to the back. It's the chess versions of the game of checkers, really. It's checkers and chess all in one. It's a nice warm-up to the game of chess. Only thing you're doing, the same rules apply. The pawn advances 2 moves on its first row. You can use the move en passant that I mentioned before earlier in lesson 2. The pawns only capture on a diagonal. Same rules apply. The only object of the game is to advance your pawn to your opponent's back row before your opponent advances his or her pawn to your back row. All right, so until we meet again for lesson 3, have fun with your Pawn Wars game. Get you a worthy opponent, practice on your strategy, and get warmed up, because in lesson 3, things will get revved up a little bit. So, until we meet again, stay home, stay safe, and God bless.